Shrewd Manager Christianity's position. The Shroud and the Sudarium both wrap the same corpse and closely fit the Gospels. CES, the team of scientists who've studied the Sudarium for 35 years, proposed a sequence of events that meshes their findings about the cloth to the Gospels. Their findings come from thousands of experiments to reproduce the overlapping stains with its combination of post-mortem and clotting lifeblood, its composition of human blood, lung fluid, and fibrin, and its features like pinholes, creases, and folds. CES's work tests the hypothesis that the Oviedo cloth is Jesus' Sudarium. Some hours before death, Jesus was beaten and scourged. The cloth shows pulmonary edema and fibrin in a clotting process that takes hours. Sometime before the Sudarium was put in place, the victim's face made contact with the ground. Limestone dust fixed to the fluids at the nose tell us this, consistent with the tradition that Jesus fell while carrying the cross. About an hour before he died, Jesus was crowned with thorns. See these multiple puncture wounds. Almost an hour after death, the crown was removed and replaced with the Sudarium. The timing evidence comes from clot retraction rings. Jesus remained in a vertical position for another hour or so when copious blood and lung fluid began draining out of his nose and mouth, consistent with being squeezed out by the constricting muscles of early rigor mortis. The stains require that his head was leaning forward and to his right, consistent with being nailed to the cross. The body was removed and left face down for another hour, with his head a little lower than his body. This accounts for the post-mortem body fluids that pooled over his forehead. Then Jesus was turned over with his arms pressed against his sides and carried for 5 to 10 minutes to a nearby tomb. CES's reproductions require a brief and intense increase in blood flow, soaking post-mortem blood to the back of the neck. This is likely when at least one left-hand imprint was formed on the cloth, holding the nose to slow down the fluid drain. After this, the head cloth was removed. All told, the cloth was on his head for 2 to 2.5 hours. Some might question CES's objectivity, since its work is officially authorized by Oviedo's Archbishop. Here are 6 reasons, however, for confidence that CES's findings are deductions from the cloth and not the result of selection or confirmation bias. First, the visual evidence is obvious, and the reasoning from it explicit. Look for yourself. From the creases to the butterfly stain, CES literally studied all corners of the Sudarium, which is the opposite of selection bias. Second, CES's experiments can be reproduced and conclusions verified. Third, Barta's book lists multiple open questions. For example, iron distribution detected did not correlate with the intensity of the blood stains. Barta calls for more testing. Reporting this is, again, the opposite of selection bias. Fourth, the deductions don't simply confirm, but far surpass what the Gospels, the Shroud, and tradition tell us. The Gospels only report the Apostle Peter noticed the linen wrappings lying there, while the Sudarium that had covered Jesus' head was folded up and lying apart from the other wrappings. The Sudarium tells us much more. Soaked with human blood and lung fluid, put on the head while the body was hanging dead, initially doubled back on the face, pinned into the hair, knotted at the top, and so on. The Shroud also provides limited data. The Shroud shows a beaten man and puncture wounds, but with very little blood on the face. The Sudarium tells us much more. Many of the Sudarium stains are not visible on the Shroud, but were discovered using microscopes and other modern tools. Confirmation bias is supposed to flow the other way. The Sudarium tells us far more than tradition, too. Consider CES's hypothesis that Jesus was removed from the cross and laid face down. Neither the Gospels, nor the Shroud, nor 1,500 years of Christian art even hint at such a posture. All this comes straight from the Sudarium and nowhere else. Fifth, the Sudarium offers an unexpected but plausible solution to the riddle of the Shroud man's floating hair. Some scholars posit exotic image formation theories to explain it, but the Sudarium's answer is more mundane. While on the cross, the cloth was pinned into the long hair. When the cloth was removed, Much of the man's hair, matted with blood, sweat, and dirt, remained molded in place. Sixth, the mere existence of a face cloth bloodied by a crucified man strongly points to Jesus. Here's why. Crucifixion's cruel calculus was to publicly and gruesomely terrify subjugated peoples to deter crime, especially crimes against the state. One example is sufficient. The 6,000 survivors of Spartacus's rebel army were crucified along the Appian Way from Rome to Capua, 120 miles, and their bodies left there to rot for years as a warning against any future insurrections. So it doesn't make sense that a crucified man's head was covered, unless he was Jewish. If a Jew dies from bloody wounds, Jewish practice is to collect his blood and bury it with him. Romans often deferred to local customs. Do you see the problem? A non-Jew would not be covered, so no Sudarium, and a Jew's bloody headcloth would have been buried with his body. It's not. It's in Oviedo. If ancient claims of resurrection are true, however, Jesus solves this. Jewish, so his blood was collected, but no body to bury the cloth with. The identification of Jesus is secured by puncture wounds of lifeblood consistent with a crown of thorns and fibrin formation consistent with recent trauma, such as scourging. This concludes 3 videos on the Sudarium of Oviedo. The Sudarium, with its stains, holes, and creases, fits models and photos of the Shroud Man. Scientific tests and experiments confirm this. The evidence also reveals a staining sequence that's consistent with the Gospels, yet goes far beyond them in a credible way. In sum, we conclude the 2 cloths wrap the same corpse, and that corpse closely fits with the Gospel's accounts of Jesus. Next, we answer the question, is the shroud fake? That is it the product of a human hand-eye-brain process?